We're not like the county. Not like the county. We have to wait till 1 o'clock. About 2 minutes or a minute, depending on. Of course, I have to go by that clock. Anyway, let's begin. Welcome, everyone. We appreciate you being here. Because this meeting is being videotaped, it will appear on YouTube and so on. There's a couple notices I'd like to read. And the first one is recorded meetings. Please be advised, North Frontenac meetings are recorded. By attending a public meeting, you are consenting to your image, voice, and comments being recorded. Members of council, staff, delegates, and attendees are advised that they may be subject to legal action if their actions result in inappropriate and or unacceptable behavior or comments. The next is the land acknowledgement. We begin this gathering by acknowledging and celebrating these traditional lands as a gathering place of the First Peoples and their ancestors who are entrusted to care for Mother Earth since time immemorial. We do so respecting both the land and the Indigenous people who continue to walk with us through this world. Today, the Township of North Frontenac is committed to working with Indigenous peoples and all residents to pursue a united path of reconciliation. There's a number of people here today, but I'm not going to introduce them. I'm going to let Sonia Bolton from the County of Frontenac, I'll actually turn the meeting over to her and let her carry it from here.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for coming. My name is Sonia Bolton. I'm the manager of community planning for the County of Frontenac, and our team has the privilege of also providing planning services to the Township of North Frontenac. I'm joined today by Brad Gaffney, who is a professional engineer with the company Newterra, who is here to help explain the communal services technology. And I just wanted to acknowledge some other staff and members of council in the room. So we have Tara Miskey, who's the clerk and planning manager, Brooke Dreschler, who is the deputy clerk and assistant to the planning manager. We have Dawn Reed, who is the chief building official, and Darwin Sproul, the manager of public works. We also have Joe Gallivan and Alex Petraka from the County of Frontenac also joining us. And in addition to the mayor, I see Councillor Fred Fowler, Roy Hudel, Wayne Good. Am I missing anyone? John came in. Thank you. And John Ingalls is here as well. So welcome and thank you, everyone. So the purpose of the session is really, it's just an information session to learn more about what communal water and wastewater systems are, and have a conversation about what the county has done to this point with respect to this issue, and start talking amongst the community members about how this infrastructure could be used here specifically to benefit North Frontenac in the future. So just a few housekeeping items before we get started. If you want to receive future notices as we move ahead with this project, please ensure that you sign the sheet that's just inside the door to the council chambers here, and leave us with your address and email, and we'll be sure to include you on any future communications. Our presentation is probably going to take about 40 to 45 minutes, and then we'll certainly have lots of time at the end for questions and discussions. We are, with the electronic recording notice, right, we are being joined today by people just joining through the Zoom platform. And because of that, we do, if anybody does want to ask a question here afterwards, we do need to use the microphone. So we have a microphone we can pass around, but without the microphone, the folks online are not able to hear us. And if you are online and do want to ask a question, please feel free to use the raise hand function on Zoom. And if you're on Zoom on your phone, I believe it's *9 in order to raise your hand. So we can repeat that later on too. So, but we do need to use the microphone so everyone can hear us. Just a general request to mute your phones. If you need to step out and take a call, please feel free to do so. Any questions about process for this afternoon? Otherwise, we'll get started with the presentation itself. Okay, I think we're good. If Brooke, if you can put the slides up. And I think this remote will work, I'm hoping. Great. Thanks, Brooke. Thanks very much. Move ahead. So just in terms of what we're going to go over today, we're going to briefly talk about what exactly are communal services. And we're going to talk about the work that the County of Frontenac has done on this issue and why we have gone down this path. We're going to talk about the creation of the public utility that the county and the 4 townships have created to manage this infrastructure. And then I'm going to turn it over to Brad here, who's going to talk about how the communal services technology works. So you can have an understanding, particularly from the septic or the sewage side of things, because that is often a big concern for people in our communities with the number of lakes and wetlands that we have, always concerned about how that affects the environment. So he's going to speak to the technology. And then at the end, I'm going to wrap up and talk about the land use planning side of things, which is really how can we use this infrastructure as a tool for community building and protecting our environment. So building sustainably into the future. So in a brief nutshell, the communal services are shared drinking water and wastewater services that provide treatment for water and wastewater to clusters of residences or businesses. Sometimes they're referred to as decentralized systems. I find the engineering community refers to them a lot as decentralized. On the planning side, it's usually communal. We say both terms, they mean the same thing. So they operate on the same basic design principles as the conventional municipal treatment systems, like the big plants that you would see in cities, except these aren't connected to a big central facility. They're basically right-sized facilities that treat water and wastewater close to where it is needed and used. Within a neighborhood, within a development, they're meant to be like little mini treatment systems on their own, and they can be added onto and scaled based on, say, phasing of a development of a subdivision, for instance. Communal services can be less expensive than central municipal services, and they reduce the need to pipe the water and the wastewater long distances. So I know I live in the city of Kingston. They just did a huge addition to one of the wastewater treatment plants there, hundreds of millions of dollars. So these systems are not that expensive as that. They're also more environmentally friendly than your traditional private septic systems that you would have on rural properties. So it was this quote here: the lack of municipal services in our villages challenges the future community viability. This is a quote from the Frontenac County official plan. And it was something that really gave us pause for thought in terms of how are we going to grow and change and develop as a community in the future? And as planners on our team, we don't think just 10 or 20 years down the road. We think, 50 years and 100 years. And thinking specifically about our rural context and about our rural villages and our hamlets. So in Frontenac, we don't have any traditional water or sewer systems. The one exception to that is that there is the village of Sydenham in South Frontenac. They do have piped water services, but that was installed because of a requirement from the Ministry of Environment about 25 years ago because of contamination of wells within the village. So they do have a piped water system in the village for that. But other than that, we do not have the big traditional municipal facilities for water and wastewater. But our settlement areas, our villages and hamlets, they're very historic. The lots in them are very small. And so one of the concerns is the modern standard today, if you're going to build on a lot and you're going to build on a well and a septic system, is to have about 2 acres in order to do that, and in order to do it properly and safely. So you can imagine you can't build a tight-knit neighborhood when everybody's spaced out on 2 to 2 acre lots. And that lot practice, that is what we currently have in our historic villages and our hamlets. They're also the areas where we see the majority of our businesses and our services, such as our schools and banks and pharmacies. And we want those services to stay there. We want them to be something that continue to be available to our community members. And as I stated, to try and service those villages on traditional municipal services, it would be a significant public investment that just none of our townships could afford to be able to do that. So it was this idea of, well, what if we used communal services. Communal services have been around for a long time, but they're not something that has been used in Ontario very much, and I'll get into that in a minute. But we started about 9 years ago looking into this and started working with a consulting team called WSP, and to do a review of the technologies, the regulations, the different governance models. And what we learned from that is that, and we'll learn from Brad further, is that the technology is not really the issue. I mean, everybody, I think, and I'm going to be on as a planner, you know, coming from an urban environment to working in a rural environment, I had always just heard the horror stories of communal services are bad because then you hear about old campgrounds and failed systems. And if a communal system does fail and a municipality is forced by the government to step in, take it over, fix it up, that's a lot of work and it's a lot of money and it leaves a bad taste in people's mouths. But what we found through our research is the technology itself isn't the problem, it's how it's maintained. It's the fact that it needs to be properly maintained, monitored, you know, updated, upgraded, replaced when needed. That was the key issue. But we felt by using communal services, there were a lot of advantages, right? So we could have development on smaller lots. We wouldn't need 2 acres for every property. And so that means even if you wanted to develop further in the villages and in our hamlets, you would be able to do so without impacting other wells and septic systems. It helps to strengthen the local economy because we, you know, hopefully keep the doors open on our current businesses and hopefully attract new businesses. It's also our hope that we're able down the road in the county to see maybe some small business parks pop up right now. Again, we don't have many of those because, you know, the servicing needs on a traditional septic system just really aren't that feasible. But using communal, you could have a small cluster of a small plaza with some commercial uses, some offices in it, and it would really bolster the local economy for us that way. It helps us create and support a walkable community. As I said, if everybody's spread out onto 2 acres, yeah, you can still walk through the neighborhood, but especially in a village or hamlet, you need that density to actually feel as though you're walking within that type of environment. And more importantly, it opens the doors for additional types of housing. Right now, when you have development on a well and a septic system, you mostly have single detached dwellings, which is fine, but lots of people get to a point in their life, either early on or later on, where they don't want to own a big house. They, you know, maybe they want a townhouse or maybe they'd like a small apartment. But we don't really have a lot of that in the county, and that's tied directly to servicing. So if we had communal servicing in some of our hamlets and we could do some small apartment buildings, we could do some townhouses, people who wanted to stay in their community could continue to stay there. Right now, a lot of people in Frontenac, if they want to move into a small apartment, they're going into Kingston or Napanee, or they're going to Perth, and they just don't have the option of staying here because they can't find the form of housing that they're looking for. So there are also environmental advantages from both the natural environment, but also public health. Then private services. So there, with these systems, there's fewer malfunctions, there's a longer life. And with regular maintenance, you can monitor their performance, you can, you know, fix problems early. So definitely a lot of advantages over than having individual people on reliance of their own wells and septic systems. So this example here, I'm gonna explain it because some of the text doesn't show up really well. But excuse me, on the left is an example of a subdivision that was approved in South Frontenac, and it's 16 lots. I think the average lot size works out to be 1.5 acres. The green rectangles are the septic fields, not the houses. And when we worked with WSP on the communal servicing study, we asked them, can you show us an example? So they took this subdivision and said, what could you do with the subdivision instead if it was on communal? And so that's the alternative is what you have showing on the right-hand side. So instead of 16 units, you have 62 units. And the green square is still the septic field, or the green rectangle is still the septic field. But with that 62 units, you have 41 single detached homes still, but you also have 9 townhouses and a 12 unit apartment block. And then the small purple square near the main road, that is intended to be like a mixed-use commercial node there as well. So a lot more mix of uses, a lot more mix of housing types, a little bit more density, but still not, out of context with the area. This subdivision is near Inverary. So we wanted to be able to show what is possible early on with using communal services. So when it comes to communal services, I see three main things that all come together in terms of how it all works. So I'm going to speak a little bit about governance and the operations, and then Brad's going to talk about the technology. And as I said, then I'm going to bring it back to the land use planning and community building tool. So the second part of the study that we did with WSP was, okay, well, if we're looking at doing communal services, and if it's the operations and maintenance, what if the county and the townships took responsibility for it? How do we do that? What's the best way of doing that? So we did a governance model study in terms of how all of these operations would actually work. So one of the things in terms of communal services right now, one of the roadblocks, I guess, and why you don't see many of them in Ontario right now, and Brad will speak to this on one of his slides, is that when a private developer comes and wants to do development on communal, the province requires them to enter into what's called a municipal responsibility agreement, or an MRA. So it's basically a legal agreement between the property owner and the municipality. And essentially what it means is, at the end of the day, if the developer goes broke, if it doesn't get finished, if something goes wrong, the municipality is going to step in and they're going to take it over. It's the right thing to do, but it's a really expensive proposition for the municipalities if something does go wrong, because it's expensive. So usually what municipalities have done is they have said to developers, sorry, I've got a couple. Pardon me, is that we will sign the municipal responsibility agreement, but if I'm just going to do, it's Friday, I'm going to do simple math. Let's say your system costs $1 million. We want $1 million so that we can put it in a reserve fund, because that's the only way we can afford it if something goes wrong. And then the developer says, well, you've just doubled my servicing costs. The project's no longer feasible. Goodbye. And they walk away. So to deal with that, the governance model that the county and its partner townships found through the study, the best model was to use what's called a municipal service corporation. So this is a public utility that can be created under the regulations of the Ontario Municipal Act, and there are a lot of benefits to that. So you can line up across the whole county what your growth and long-term objectives are in terms of development. You can have consistent implementation across the entire region. It allows you also to separate the finances. So it has its own financing structure separate from all of the municipalities. In the long term, once things get built and are operating, it also allows for profits and profit sharing. And the services and the corporation remain 100% publicly owned by all of the participating municipalities. So to that end, that is what we did, is we have created a public utility, a regional public utility, to manage water and wastewater services in the county. And it's the first of its kind in Ontario. All 4 of our townships and the county agreed to join, and the utility itself was incorporated by the province back in November of 2023. So since then, the utility has hired an experienced operator on contract to assist them with developing best practices. They'll be available to help review proposed developments and eventually to maintain these systems once they're up and running and in the ground. In terms of where they are now, so the board of directors and their technical advisory group are working on developing best practices. So an example of that would be, I know they're looking at shortlisting certain types of water and wastewater treatment systems, so that when people come in and they want to use it, we have like a pre-approved list of certain technology. The county, we amended our official plan back in October of 2023. to basically to recognize these services, to allow them throughout the county, and to provide direction to the townships, and to sort of start the discussion like we are today about how they want to use those services. And so we are now at the stage where we are speaking at each of the townships to talk to the communities about how they want to use it, so that we can move forward eventually with an official plan or recommendation for their community. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Brad.
Great, thank you, Sonia. My name is Brad Gaffney. I'm an engineer with Nuterra, and we're based out of Brockville, Ontario. So Nuterra is a water treatment company, and actually we're an environmental company that focuses on water treatment. We started in '92 right in Brockville, still in the same spot. We've just grown. We're about a 150,000 square foot facility there where we make these water systems. Variety of technologies that we use to treat water. We started doing remediation, which is groundwater, where there's a gas station, for example, that had contaminated soils. And then we would go in and basically extract the slurry of gasoline and water and separate it, put the oil and water in a tank, and then put the oil and gas in a tank, and then water in the ground. And that it's evolved over the years, still do that. But we've added on different verticals of water treatment through different parts of the industry. So my focus is on municipal or decentralized water treatment, both on drinking water and sewage treatment. So I work through basically all of Canada, do a lot of work in the US, obviously, South America, Africa, all over the globe. So we build these systems in a factory. They're designed and engineered by our team. We have about 100 folks in that building. We have 4 other locations that do the same sort of thing in different technologies. But yeah, we engineer, manufacture these things and ship them all around the world. And essentially, there's the technology we're going to talk about today is called MBR. It's a membrane bioreactor for treating sewage. But we also do drinking water systems. So as you can imagine, there's a variety of technologies that have been around for decades that are approved and adopted by municipalities and big wastewater and drinking water facilities for treating drinking water. This is a picture of our facility. You see a lot of modular containers. We do modular buildings. We do things on skids. But in the end, we build water treatment systems that get built in a factory, deployed to site, and quickly operational. We basically have mostly North America focused installation lists. So you see all those dots. Those are all water systems that we've built over the last 3 decades. Through acquisition, we also own a number of different other companies that treat water, such as PFAS contamination, if you've heard of it in the US. There's a tremendous amount of drinking water that's been contaminated with these forever chemicals. We do a lot of work in removing that. We do work with food and beverage, work with big companies that want to reuse water using all types of different technologies for water treatment. Today, I'm going to focus, as I said, mostly on the sewage side of things, but I do want to just touch on the drinking water side. So although these systems are modular and scalable, and what that means is they can be deployed for developments that grow over time. So instead of building a $100 million plant like a municipality would do or a city center would do, and then be set up for a 20-year growth plan that they've come up with their plan for the city. But in smaller areas that have no servicing or no servicing yet, these decentralized or communal plants are able to be deployed to allow the capital cost of that plant to be in line with the number of houses or commercial properties that are being built, so that it doesn't burden the developer, but also the homeowners from an operation and just home costs. So these decentralized systems are much more cost effective, but they still use best available technologies. And I'll touch on what that means, but essentially, there is different ways to treat sewage. You can use a septic system, as you would typically see in a rural area. You can also use lagoons, where small villages have. And they're probably one of the worst sort of types of technologies from the standpoint of actually treating nutrients. So nutrients that are in the wastewater that we produce as humans has certain constituents like phosphorus molecules and nitrates and ammonia nitrates and things that get in our waterway that harm the environment. There's advanced technologies that are available that remove those nutrients. And some of the older technologies that you're probably familiar with, like I said, septic and lagoons, don't have those advanced features to do that. So you're seeing a bit of a shift away from that. Most city centers, larger ones, are improving some of their technologies. They don't necessarily use the best available technologies because there's a number outside of the lagoon. There's a number of types of sewage ways to treat, different ways to treat sewage. It can be extended aeration. I'm naming off things. There might be a few people in the crowd that understand these technologies, but sequence batch reactors. There's RBCs. There's I guess MBBRs, there's MBRs. Today, we're going to focus on MBRs because if you were to look at a level of tier of what is the best available technology that takes the wastewater, the sewage that's coming into it, and turns it to clean water that has very little or no nutrients in it, that puts it back to our environment is MBR. And it's accepted and adopted around the world as the best available technology for treating sewage. And then there's levels down below that as the technologies tier down. On the drinking water side, there's different ways to treat drinking water. As you can imagine, there's different sources of drinking water. So we have different levels of treatment. It could be water coming from a well, so the water can be hard. So there's different technologies for treating that. It could be surface water, could have organics and things that dead fish and those types of viruses and things that you have to remove. So those also have different technologies. So typically on drinking water systems, when we're providing those, we're working with the water source. But the same idea, they're built in a factory and then they ship to site and they're designed for that communal modular build out. And the picture that I'm showing on the screen shows the different phases of a development, and then the boxes below, sort of in the bottom and the center, as the development is scaled up, you're just adding those over years. So this could be a 5 or 10 year build out, and the green one being the first, or the gray one being the first phase. And then you add the blue phase, and you add the green phase as the development builds up. So these are just some decentralized facilities that Nuterra has installed. There is hundreds of decentralized facilities in Ontario of different types of technologies. But as Sonia mentioned, there has been quite a few headwinds in Ontario for getting these systems in. It's really right around the regulatory process. As a province, we're very set up as a centralized type of treatment province. And the US, it's pretty much, for the last 20 years, they've been doing decentralized along with centralized. So there's a bit of a, I guess, a shift in the mandate that we're seeing over the last few years. We've been doing this for about 20 years, and in 20 years, we have 40 systems in Ontario. To put this in perspective, we started in Colorado 2 years ago, and we have 18 systems there. So it's really not a lot. There should be a lot more of these around the province, and it's just a matter of the regulatory process being streamlined and being designed for decentralized, not these mega plants that are hundreds of millions of dollars. What we decided back in the early 2000s, when we decided to adopt MBR as our technology, we didn't invent it, we adopted it. And what we did is we said, look, there's some advanced countries in the world using this technology for large mega plants, like Singapore. They reuse a lot of their water. We said, we're going to take this technology, but we're going to put it in a smaller form factor and target these decentralized facilities. So if anybody's familiar with the building code, up to about 10,000 liters per day of water treatment can be done under the building code using septic technologies, or there are some other pre-approved technologies that can be used under the building code. We don't go that low in flow, although we can. We focus mostly on everything above the building code, which falls under the provincial regulations. So in the province, the Ministry of Environment is the police and the regulatory body that enforces the types of technologies that are allowed to be used, and based on the flows and the types of environments they're discharging into. Just to put it in perspective, this gives you the size of an MBR. So this is a packaged MBR system in Southwold Township. It's about 40 feet wide, 60 feet long. There's no bed, there's no subsurface bed. The water that, the sewage that comes in one end gets treated to the level of quality that it looks just like that glass of water, and it gets discharged. Output of it is going to a creek. You can't see it on the right side of the screen, but there's a creek that discharge point where this water all goes to. Just to kind of elaborate a little bit on the ECA and the EA process, I'm using acronyms, but under the Ministry of Environment, the policies for approving and getting a decentralized or communal plant in place can typically involve a process that can take up to 3 to 5 years and sometimes even longer in some cases. And the reason is the regulatory process is set up for centralized plants building, hundreds of $1 million plant that's going to treat, tens of thousands of people. With decentralized, they still have to go through that same process, which takes a lot of time. And there's a lot of unnecessary, checks and balances that are put in place that don't make sense for the smaller package systems. And there's a movement within the Ministry of Environment to improve that. And we're seeing tremendous progress in the last couple of years, thanks to Frontenac County, to be honest. The EA process is really that front end piece where they're trying to evaluate different technologies, and that can take 2 to 3 years, maybe 4 to 5 sometimes. And then the ECA is that document that you're left with at each facility, no matter where it is located in Ontario. There's an ECA. It's an environmental compliance agreement, and that report or that permit has very strict rules within it. It dictates, how clean the water has to be, where you're going to put the water. What level of operator has to be licensed that's going to operate it, to the level of, is there a backup generator? It has to have a backup generator, to everything from how frequent do you have to take water samples and reporting. And these systems are monitored and policed by the Ministry of Environment. So when you see one approved within the province, you have to know the due diligence has been done and that the quality of water coming out that matches where it's being put. Some applications of decentralized systems do subsurface discharge, like a septic bed, but the water is fairly clean. On more advanced treatments like MBR, we can do both subsurface, but also surface discharge. So it can go back into our lakes and our rivers and our streams. It can go into sensitive areas where there's sensitive species at risks, because we have very tight control of the nutrients, and the water's cleaner than the reserve or the actual body of water it's going into. So what is MBR? What is this technology I'm talking about? It's a biological process and a mechanical process. The mechanical meaning there's a filter, and I brought one with me to show you what it looks like. The main reason why we decided that MBR was going to be our technology to focus on, even though in some situations that advanced treatment isn't necessarily required. But as time goes on, we see regulatory requirements tightening and these nutrient removals getting much lower. And it becomes MBR is in many cases the only technology that can get to that. So the big advantage is the high quality output, guaranteed approval with the Ministry of Environment because they accept it and adopt it and they understand it. Small footprint, highly dense, and so it fits in a very small form factor in the sense that you don't need a big septic bed, you don't need a lot of land to do it, and it allows smaller developments or even larger developments in small land to be implemented cost effectively. And they're modular and scalable because we can build and basically Lego block these together as time goes on. Developments can be aligned with those capital costs and the operational costs. The process is really simple. There is a toilet, you flush it. You have the water that goes down, it gets screened. So we remove any types of toiletries, shoes, GI Joes, whatever gets put down there, you believe it gets down there. You can think about it. And then it goes to an equalization tank, and that tank is there to hit those surges. That's that first tank you see. You'll see in all the tanks, there's little tiny bubbles. The first tank has bigger bubbles. What that does is it just keeps everything mixed. So we use the bubbles just to keep everything mixed up so they're not sinking in the bottom and getting caught in the corners. From that tank being able to go up and down with the daily flows. In the morning, everybody's using water to have showers. In the evening, there's cooking and other wash water is being used. So you'll see those peak flows, and that tank is designed for those peak flows based on the development size. So if it's a 100-home development, that tank is sized appropriately to handle the peak flows. The next stage is where Mother Nature takes up. And we basically understand that the bugs that are in the sewage and how they need to live and thrive, no different than the bugs in your stomach. There's bugs in sewage. And as they become active, if they have the right environment, they start consuming and breaking down the sewage into what we would call technically a mixed liquor. But it looks like a really dark chocolate milk, to be honest, without the taste. It has small bubbles, and you'll see all the small bubbles. And the reason why we use those is to transfer oxygen into the water. Now, with the bugs, if they have, I'm going to give you a couple numbers here. If they have 2 parts per million of oxygen or 2 milligrams per liter of oxygen, they're happy. They also need to have a balanced pH, so they like to be around 7-ish. And they also want it to be semi-warm. They like warmth. They have those 3 things. They're very active, and they consume and break down the sewage. So we design that environment based around that with the control system. So there's a bit of a retention time from the time you flush the toilet to when the water goes in the system at the one end and goes out on the other end. It's anywhere from 8 to 12 hours. And mostly because of that biological process, there is a bit of a time where the bugs have to do their thing and eat it and eat up the sewage and get that chocolate milk look happening. We move that from that aerobic, that center tank, to the last stage where we've got these membranes sitting in there. These membranes are ultra filter, and it's a hollow fiber. The next slide talks a little bit about them, but essentially they're submerged in the chocolate milk. And if that mixed liquor, that chocolate milk is mostly water, it's 1% solid, or 10,000 milligrams per liter solids. So essentially, most of it's water. And what we do with that hollow fiber is we basically extract the clean water out of that 1% solid chocolate milk. Inside that mixed liquor, we do have fibers and combustible particles and phosphorus molecules and hydrocarbons and bacteria and viruses, all the stuff we do not want in our waterways. So the nice thing about an MBR and its technology is it creates a physical barrier, actually preventing any of those constituents from getting through and going into the environment. Think of the fiber. It's called a hollow fiber for a reason. It's hollow in the middle and it's fibrous around the outside. And if you think of if this was a straw, I didn't bring a fiber with me, but you can touch them later. Essentially inside, it's hollow. The wall of the straw or the fiber has millions of holes. In the bottom picture, you see the arrow pointing to that 0.04 micron hole size. That's classified as what we would call an ultrafilter. So it's a very small pore size that will not allow all those other things we don't want to get through, except for clean water. So what we do is we plug the bottom of it and we put a vacuum on the top part of the straw. And now the straw, on the picture, you can see the housing, they're all connected together. So they have a port at the very top that we hook up to a really small pump that provides suction. And we pull the clean water droplets through those holes, those 0.04 micron holes, into the hollow of the straw and then out and into the environment. Everything else stays within that tank. Now you imagine there's going to be things left over, all that phosphorus and bacteria and viruses. That goes in what we call the sludge blanket. And there's not a lot of sludge, but we do move that because there's only 1% of the solids in that water. We move that to another tank. And that's called a sludge storage tank. But the output of the system is the right. On the left is what you put in that mixed liquor, that chocolate milk. And there's a bunch of parameters. I won't go into the details of them, but those are sort of the constituents that we're concerned about, the Ministry of Environment is concerned about, that we do not want in our environment. By minimizing those using this technology, we can produce clean water that can be put back in the environment. To the point that we proved this technology, we did a demonstration of toilet to tap. At our factory, we got 100 people there, probably a third or a little more than a third work in the factory, in the shop, building these systems. And we put up some bathrooms and connected to one of our packaged systems. Then we put it on the output to a reverse osmosis. And then we pulled all our board members and said, hey, put your money where your mouth is, have a drink. And they did. And they're all here still. They're still with us. So yeah, the technology works. There's no question, but just like Sonia said, it's really about the all the parameters around operation and maintenance and making sure that these things are taken care of. They're not a septic system where you set it and forget it. But you get to also remember you're removing a tremendous amount of nutrients. You're protecting the environment. We're building communities for our future generations and protecting their water and ours as we use it. The building that I'm showing here now has two parts. As I said, there's those tanks I talked about. They're on the bottom in that blue. It's a fiberglass reinforced plastic tank. Essentially, there's compartments in it: the EQ, the sludge, and sorry, the EQ, the aerobic tank, and the sludge. And then above, there's a building, and it's got the membranes in it. And you can see the blue in the little building up top, and that's where the membranes in. The far right building is where we do remove all the GI Joes and shoes and toiletries. And then we've got some blowers and things inside that. So that system is designed to treat about 100 homes and has a footprint of 8 feet by 40. And then you've got an in-ground tank. Now the water that is cleaned, or the sewage that goes in at one side, the output being water, is then can go directly to the creeks, rivers, lakes, and streams. We have these systems going into very sensitive policy 2 receivers. We have them going into Lake Muskoka. We have them going all over the country into different areas of water. And because there is no bypass, you cannot, like a municipality has the advantages in some cases. Big cities can, turn a valve, and if they get a big rain event, they can just bypass and send it on out to Lake Ontario or wherever it's going. These systems don't have that advantage. They are bound by the membrane. The water has to go through the membrane before it can get to our environment. So it really provides that a guaranteed protection. Oops. Just a couple examples of installation systems in Quinte West. So it's going actually to a very sensitive receiver in the Bay of Quinte. So you can see the stainless steel tanks on the right side. Those are where the membranes are. This downward picture of it. This was bought by a developer. It's a 500 home development. It's treating sewage for a school. It's treating sewage for the 500 homes, and then it's discharging or outputting the clean water to the Bay of Quinte. Similar situation here. This is a warehouse in Southold Township, and it's treating about 220 equivalent of about 225 homes. So it's an Amazon warehouse, and it's actually cleaning the water to the level to discharge to surface into a creek that's nearby. This is another community. It's more of a resort in Lake Muskoka. It's discharging right to the lake. And then we've got some smaller systems for campgrounds that do exactly the same thing. This one's in the Bay of Quinte area as well. That's pretty much it from a standpoint of the technology. It's very simple in the sense that it's always the same, whether it's treating 10 homes or whether it's treating 10,000 homes. The process is identical, but it's obviously a little bigger or has a few more components to it. If you have any questions, I can answer that. Actually, Sonia's going to have a few more slides. Missed a slide. My apologies. Yeah, from an operations standpoint, as you can imagine, these aren't septic systems to set it and forget it. They have to be maintained, and that's dictated in the ECA I talked about. So the Ministry of Environment will determine what the level of operator that has to operate it, and they go to site and basically once a week check on the system, take the reports, and then they're the operator of record for these systems.
Great, thank you, Brad. Just a few more slides. So just to sort of bring it back in terms of the county and the township, and really the idea that communal services can be a tool for sustainable community building. And I'm going to just touch on a couple of local examples in the works here. This first one is the mixed housing master plan taking place in Verona in South Frontenac. So this is a municipal owned and led project where they are looking at developing a mix of townhouse and small apartment units within Verona using communal services. And it's going to be a mix of, social housing, market rate housing. So it'll be a really diverse mix of, affordability as well as the tenancy in terms of who is going to be living there. They are in the process of doing their environmental approval. And I think right now, based on the numbers, they're probably going to end up with about 80 units across the housing master plan area that they are looking at. The second example I'm going to share, make sure I get my stats right, is it's a 2-acre site in the village of Charlotte Lake in central Frontenac. So this is the site of the former public school that was there. There is a new public school. It didn't leave completely. It's just moved down the road. And, you know, as a planner, Charlotte Lake is what I like to call a complete community, right? So it still has a grocery store, a pharmacy, a bank, the library, some restaurants, school. It's got all of those services that the rural area needs to serve all of its citizens that we want to see stay there. And this site itself being 2 acres, it's right in the heart of the village. You walk down to the end of Garrett Street and the pharmacy and the grocery store are right there. And the township bought the site with the intention of using it for seniors housing. And originally they were going to use the existing well and septic on the site and would have gotten about eight units. And we said to them, you know, what if we use communal servicing? Like, what is possible with communal servicing? So we worked with them to get some funding from the Federation of Canadian Municipalities to do a feasibility study. And that work determined that using communal services, you could do about 45 to 50 units on the property. So this is just a very rough concept plan of one option for the site, showing 2 small 3-story apartment buildings for the site. So still more work to be done. We have to start the environmental approval process, so not as far along as Verona, but certainly, I mean, there aren't apartments in any of our villages right now, small apartment buildings. So the opportunity to offer up additional housing types like this has an amazing advantage to the community. So in terms of the county, we did amend our official plan, and generally the county official plan provides direction and enabling policies. And we leave the details to the individual township official plans because you know your township best. So at the county level, what we've said is that new residential subdivisions that are going to be in the hamlets and villages must be on communal services unless it's completely not feasible to do that, because you need that in order to achieve a compatible density to knit into the existing fabric of the building. We also talked about how townships might consider using communal services within their existing hamlets to service things like their main streets. So one example would be on Frontenac Islands. There's the village of Marysville on Wolf Island. On their main street, they have, there's a hotel with a restaurant and then 2 other restaurants. I think combined, and Joe, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that every year for them to pump out their holding tanks for their businesses, I think combined is about $130,000 for the year. And imagine if there was a communal system that could deal with that and that you could put that $130,000 towards more sustainable technology that would be less of a problem for the business owner and better for the environment. So that's one other option that townships can have if they want to proactively do that within their existing villages. And as I mentioned, we're also hoping that communal servicing will be a vehicle now for us to be able to have small commercial or business parks that we haven't had in the past that would improve economic development across the region. So at the township level for your official plan, that's kind of the process that we're at now. We've done a presentation in Central Frontenac. We're here speaking to you today. South Frontenac has already incorporated some policies within their new official plan, which is with the county for review. But the idea is, how do you want to use communal services in North Frontenac? So do you want to use them in all of your hamlets and villages? Are there 1 or 2 hamlets or villages that are of a particular priority that you would like to see something happen first, right? How could you use the technology to create different forms of housing, you know, and what scale and density would those be at? And so scale is the actual size. Density is, you know, how many units can you put within a hectare or an acre of land? So other questions about how would you use communal still in a rural area? So what kind of housing and at what density? So, you know, we could have somebody come along and say, okay, well, I've just bought 100 acres. I'd like to build 300 homes. And all of a sudden you don't have a village that has 300 homes in it, you know? So you want to be very intentional about what your expectations are from the private development sector about what they can and cannot do and where they can and cannot do it. Would you want communal services on a waterfront property? Particularly if it meant all of a sudden nobody had a septic system near the lake, that it was further away, that you could do a more clustered development further from the water rather than having everything along the shoreline. And then ultimately too, the official plans need to set out what are the studies and plans that are required by a developer in order to prove that communal servicing for their particular development is appropriate and that there's going to be no negative impact. So that is the end of the formal presentation. I've just left some contact information up there and some websites for more information. But at this point, I think between Brad and I, we're happy to take questions or comments if you just have information that you want to share. And I believe Tara has a microphone that she's going to share around. And Brooke's going to keep an eye online. So also online, if you're on Zoom on your computer, there's the raised hand function. And again, if you're joining by cell phone, it's *9. Yes, unfortunately, we have to use the microphone, otherwise people online can't hear you. Lady here had her hand up, Tara.
Hi. So this is actually a question for Brad. So before we can even think about developing in the north, I think we should have Brad explain how the membrane bioreactor removes chemo, pharmaceuticals, and dialysis and different things from the sewage that's going to be transitioned back into drinkable water.
So pharmaceuticals come in various sizes of molecules. Some molecules are larger than the 0.04 microns that I showed on the membrane themselves. Some are smaller and dissolved. Longer chain type molecules can be destroyed using a technology called ozone. So we actually own a ozone company. So we integrate those into a lot of our facilities that are going to long-term care homes or hospitals. We do quite a few hospitals in East Africa. And in those hospitals, because there's expected amounts of high concentration of pharmaceuticals, we use ozone to destroy it. And then we capture those in a carbon bed, which removes them. And then the carbon then gets shipped away and destroyed.
So can you provide the documentation for that? Because most stuff online, there is absolutely no treatment system that removes any of those.
So it's a combination of
100% from the system. And by pumping those back into water systems, you're affecting fish habitats, other ecological systems as well. So do you have the documentation to back that up?
Yeah, there's white papers I can reference and send after this call, but definitely it isn't just one technology, it's a combination. So that is part of, it's one of, so it's that membrane to get the water to the level of quality of cleanness that it can now be used with another technology, as I just mentioned, ozone. That technology can actually destroy the compounds and break them down small enough that we can capture them in carbon beds. So that's something I can provide you some more details on.
All the councillors have that in the county? Is that a big concern for them? That can't be totally eliminated?
So the concentration levels on a single residential home, for example, that has a septic bed, that's going back into the environment. There's nothing in a septic system that will prevent the nutrients, the pharmaceuticals, or anything that you're doing now. So the current technologies used in rural areas are not treating for that. When you start getting into densities that have higher concentrations because of hospitals and those types of things, then there's options there to help mitigate it.
Again, how do we protect our water? How do we do this? How do we protect our waterfronts to prevent developments on them?
So I just, a question for clarification. So do you mean the use of communal services on waterfront properties or waterfront developments in
No.
general?
The communal services, because that's going to put a huge impact on our lakes that can't sustain it.
So I think that that's part of the conversation that North Frontenac can have in terms of communal services. But I guess what I would say is that anybody can come forward with a development application, whether it's a residential subdivision, whether it's a commercial resort, and they're going to have a way to service it, and they're going to have to prove that it's appropriate technology and it doesn't have a negative impact on the environment. And based on what we've seen through our work on communal services is that for those kinds of developments, whether they're waterfront or not, being able to have them on communal has significant environmental benefits. So rather than, having a subdivision of homes where everybody has a well, everybody's punching into the aquifer, everybody has a septic system and nobody knows how or if they're maintaining it properly, that having one centrally managed communal service which can be set back as far from the waterfront as you can possibly go in the development, is potentially better for the environment.
But they're still accessing the lakes. They're still putting more boats, more usage on a lake that can't sustain it. So if you take a development, or exactly for us, we're attached to Ardoch Lake. At one point, they wanted to put 129 units there. Eventually, it got down to, I think, 26, 29. Even that, if you take that little lake and you tried to plot 29 little cottages around it, which would not fit, it's a small lake. It cannot sustain that amount of people on that lake, fishing, swimming, because we all got lotions, we've all got shampoos, the boats, the gas, our lakes cannot take any more growth. 2-acre lots is totally legit. Like half-acre lots, I don't care where they are. Eventually, they end up on the lakes, and the lakes cannot sustain that use.
Okay, so you're concerned about the density of development on the
Exactly.
Okay, so we'll certainly take that in consideration.
So whether they're built 2 miles away or whatever, it's still, that subdivision is still usage that the lakes cannot sustain.
I guess this is maybe a question for our council or our municipality is the actual cost to a homeowner. Is this going to be an ongoing cost if they participate in this, or is it going to be, we were kind of led to believe it's a one-time thing that's how I understood it at the previous meeting, a one-time input for our municipality to join this. So now if a developer comes in, what will be the cost projection of a homeowner?
So in terms of the cost of your time, that was for the municipality to join the utility. So that's done. Going forward, there are no costs to the taxpayer. So what happens is if there is a development proposed, the developer is responsible for paying all of the costs of installing and making sure the system is functioning properly. And then that system gets turned over to the utility to manage, operate, and the utility will calculate a utility rate. And the homeowners within that development, or they will pay a monthly utility bill. But they won't
And
have.
who's the owner of the utility?
So the utility is owned by the county and the 4 townships.
So there'll be an ongoing cost.
No, I'm going to ask if there's somebody who wants to speak
Well,
on behalf of the.
there'll be a sewage now. It'll be now like, if I lived in a city, you have to pay a water and sewage cost, right?
Exactly.
There will be a bill.
There will be a bill because the Municipal Service Corporation is designed to operate and be self-sufficient. So when you build a house, you don't have a $20,000 septic system, you don't have a $20,000 well. What you've got is, depending how many units you have, an overall reduced cost, reduced infrastructure. But someone eventually over time has to pay for it because whatever the developer puts in there on day one, 20 or 30 years later has to be replaced because it will wear out, just like your own septic system would.
Okay.
following up to Carol's, how do you prevent, I think it was Prince Edward County, they started out with that precept, but they ended up doing, I think it's, I should have looked up, I think it's called non-metered. So it ended up, as it went down the road and needed more maintenance, needed more whatever, the expenses were building, the few people that were affected in the beginning, now the dollars, they were being spread across the whole county. And I think it was called non-metered. Is that factored in? Or is that something that can happen down the road? Because it's happened in other places in the province.
We can ask the utility to look into that, but I don't have an answer to that question.
I think it was Prince Edward County.
The idea ultimately is the people using the communal services, whether they're tenants or homeowners, they are paying for the service. So they're paying for their usage, and then there's a small portion of that that is going to a reserve fund to eventually update and replace those systems. So you might be paying $100 a month in utility fees, but you don't have to take care of your own well, and you certainly don't have to shell out $30,000 or $40,000, which I understand is the cost of a new private septic system.
My understanding is that what we want to discuss here is where in the township with zoning, we might approve communal servicing. Is that correct?
That's correct. So if in the future there is a proposal on communal, what are the expectations that you want to place upon those developers in terms of where it's appropriate to have them, how big of a development, on the waterfront, not on the waterfront, in all of your hamlets, or you have a couple of hamlets that are maybe a priority for that development. It's all about how you would like to see that technology used. And it's important to have that in your municipal documents ahead of time, because otherwise, you have a developer who comes in who has a proposal that you're not prepared for, and then it's kind of like the tail wagging the dog, and you don't want that to happen.
So my own sort of simplistic approach to this is that this system would not replace existing septic systems. It's probably for new development. So we're talking about densifying development. So that tells me we're talking about hamlets. So my own assumption would be that we would start such a plan within some or all of the hamlets and rewrite the zoning bylaw to allow small lots in such hamlets in order to get the density we're talking about.
So that's certainly possible. So I mean, it could be new development, it could be in the hamlets, or it could be a rural subdivision, not in one of the hamlets. Do you want to allow that? If so, how big? If you're going to use it for existing properties in existing villages and hamlets, then that is a conversation the township has to have, because then there would be some cost to the municipality to get that up and running. But to do that for existing lots would then open up the opportunity to do things like additional residential units within your hamlets, and to allow some intensification. So if somebody right now has, an acre of property in a hamlet, and all of a sudden it's serviced with communal, and they're able to hook into that, they could then sever off their house and create 2 more lots for infill development. So there are things that you could do within your existing in your existing villages and hamlets if the township chooses to do so. But it's also about not only how you want to use it for yourself in terms of infrastructure for your community, but also being prepared for the requests that you will get for private development in terms of using them.
My own first thoughts, I would agree with Kathy that we don't want to get smaller lots than currently exist on waterfront. And that if we were going to do this, I would be in favor of doing it just in the hamlets.
Yeah, thank you very much for this presentation. I do appreciate it. Just one quick question to Brad is that the solids, there's solids that go to the screen and there's solids that go into the filtration system and oxidation and that. What happens to those solids?
Yeah, that's a good question. So there's outputs from the plant, the one being the clean water, then the 2 you just touched on. So the first one, the toiletries, the inorganics, that's just garbage. So that gets put into a compacted form into a waste bin and goes off to waste management, no different than your household garbage. The sludge I talked about, the bugs that die, the bacteria, the viruses all basically decompose into that sludge blanket, which we move to the sludge storage tank. We call it wasting. So we move that water to this other tank at a rate of about 1% of the flow. So if the flow is 100 cubic meters, and just for reference, 1 cube of water is pretty much on par with what one home would use. So 250 liters per person, 4 people in a home, that's 1,000 liters or 1 cube. So we move the 1 cube of water into that sludge tank that I showed on the screen earlier, and we decant that tank down. So we basically have a pump that's sort of suspended, not sitting on the bottom, because the heavy things will sink and the lighter things will float. So we decant off the middle and we pump that to the front end of the system, where we then reprocess that water. What you get a result in that tank over time is a thicker tank of sludge, not just the 1% solids. You can get it to 2 to 3% solids. And then depending on the application and the size of development, it's usually taken away in is like a septic truck. So it's taken away every 30 or 40 days, depending on the usage. On larger flow systems, anything over 300 homes, we'll use something like a digester, so to neutralize that waste, and then it can be turned into fertilizer. So that's pretty much the two outputs. You've got clean water, fertilizer, and garbage.
Just want to make a statement right now, if I may. I think we're, I really like this technology. I think it's great. I wish we had it like 20 or 30 years ago, doing what we're doing now, because I think in the future, it's a great idea to have clean water coming out of this system. And I'm sure there's other companies that do the same thing, very much similar to what you're doing. And I just really like this whole system. It's great. Thank you.
My question has been presented to Mr. Moore, KFLNA. How many times has our drinking water been recycled?
I'm sorry, I missed the full question. Can you say that again?
How many times has our drinking water been recycled?
I do like that question because I'm probably drinking water from a dinosaur. There's nothing new on the planet. Water is recycled. That's a matter of fact. It eventually gets to the sea, becomes salt water, which costs us a tremendous amount of money to turn back into drinking water again. So being able to clean water, clean our sewage, and reuse the water and put it back into the environment is responsible and sustainable for the future growth of our generations.
We do not have a village in Ontario that is not already contaminated. You're starting off at a complete loss. You're not starting off with a new system.
Every system that gets installed is cleaning the water. So the more that we put these in, the more we're going to clean our aquifers and our lakes.
True enough, but you can't clean up what's already there.
There's a lot of work to do.
We're working with a system now that was invented prior to the 30s. That was when you went outside and got 2 pails of water and put it in the tub once a week. Not a shower every morning and a shower every night. Dishwashers, laundry. Throw in the car wash or two. You're flooding that system. It can't handle it. There's no possible way it can handle it. You're flushing your solids right on through. The tank doesn't have an opportunity to work. My first experience was I was putting a fence across the back of a lot. The center post hole, I didn't like the smell of it. I sent it in a sample to KFLNA. They sent back human effluent. Now that was 35 feet from the closest tile in the tile bed. 35 feet. And I didn't go on out beyond on somebody else's land to run tests see how much farther they had leached out. So I know that we don't have a village that is already contaminated. And you cannot stop it getting into the groundwater.
Bert? The idea is to do our best to clean up what we've got if it is a problem. And if we implement or institute any more development, to do it to the maximum ability of the technologies. These technologies are not cheap. But keep in mind, let's say you build 30 homes. Under the current issue, you cover 60 acres plus infrastructure. You'd have 30 septic systems, all controlled individually. Some will be done well, some won't be. You have 30 penetrations of the aquifer, so 30 potential contaminant points. And you bring that down to whatever the minimum number possible is, all professionally managed and maintained. That's the idea. I know where you're coming from. How often has the water been recycled over the years? It depends. I agree with you. But you know, this is the way we are today. And we're just trying to make it better, encourage development, and to Kathy's point, to encourage development in the right place. We know that not everybody wants densification. We know that, you know, we're different than South Frontenac, especially, and to some extent, we don't have something like Sharper Lake they have 100 people more than we do in the township, but they have this great big tax base. And that's where it is. We don't have that. So we're very cognizant of if any of this goes ahead, where we're going to do it, where we're going to allow it, what we do, and how we do it. So it's really important to hear your comments.
The problem was, 25 years too late, you kicked the can down the road too far.
Thank you.
I could go on for an hour with examples. I'm not going to, because the group that's here is not worth it.
To the mayor's point, any development that happens here is probably not going to be over 10 homes. Is this feasible for 10 or fewer? This technology, is it cost effective for a small development?
So yeah, these decentralized facilities come in different sizes, and there's technologies that can handle lower flows. Our smallest unit is about 12 homes. So it's a single 40-foot building that will treat 12 homes. It can treat as low as roughly 3 or 4 homes because there needs to be a baseline of sewage. But that's roughly the range of the smallest system that we do. Now, there is other technologies that do smaller flows as well, that are advanced, that have nutrient removals. It really just depends on the site, and if you can put in a bed, or if you're going to do a surface discharge. Those are all questions that, you know, the engineering consultant, the Ministry of Environment will take into considerations based on the technology they select.
Seems to be our challenge as councillors is to try to figure out what kind of zoning we're going to allow with what kind of technology. Like, for example, a 3-unit development in a hamlet, do you allow them to put in one large septic system, or do you have to go to the advanced technology?
So I'm gonna, like you and I are gonna have a lot of discussions over this, on this over the next year or so. But think of it this way, we talk about affordable housing on one side, or housing that's affordable. There's a difference. And then we talk about these massive houses on 2-acre lots. And we really want both, because our township is made of both types of individuals. Some are more well off than others, and there are benefits to both. So when we've been focusing on this, but if you took 12 units, that's 24 acres of land. If you could drop them back to half-acre lots or even less, all of a sudden you're looking at 6 acres of land. That drops the cost of housing dramatically. You can look at how you're going to provide, was it 1 well or 2 wells, depending on the ability of the well to produce sufficient water. and the aquifer, and then how you treat the sewage and so on. Let's say that's a break even versus 12 septic systems and 12 wells, but you have less infrastructure. And I'm listening to the idea of a building inside a hamlet and so on, and I'm kind of thinking it may work, it may not. But North Frontenac is, we pride ourselves in our pristine environment and we want to keep that. And, you know, so we really want input to how we can best control this. And that's one of the reasons this resolution is coming to council.
So is this the best system? Have you looked at other systems that do not have to filter back into water systems, that don't have to go back into our creeks and rivers and eventually end up in our lakes? Because there is no treatment that's going to eliminate the pharmaceuticals, chemos and stuff. Yes, it happens in the city. It happens everywhere else. Does it have to happen in North Frontenac?
So to answer your question, can they discharge not to the surface? Yes. So all decentralized facilities, whether the technologies MBBR or MBR, SBR, RBC, there's abilities to do subsurface with those.
So you don't have to discharge into water systems.
You don't have to discharge. Well, they are going into the water system. So just so you know, they
But in-
go to aquifers.
Whether it's like here or the one that you mentioned is going back into the water. Charlotte Lake is going back into the water. Is that still the plan for it as well?
Specifically with Charlotte Lake, they haven't done the environmental assessment, so I couldn't.
I know they have not contacted the Minister of Environment because I checked into that and got redirected from Toronto to Kingston, and they hadn't done their permits for that yet, but anyway. That's my cautionary note, is whatever the councillors do, please keep in mind what you are putting back potentially into our water systems. I got documentation. There's certain drugs that affect the ecosystem, but also children's health. I'll let you do your own research.
It's on? Okay, thank you. Brad, you mentioned constant flow. So would these systems work for developments that are entirely seasonal?
Short answer is yes. Being a seasonal system, you do have to decommission them in the wintertime. So in the fall, typically we have seasonal facilities for marinas and golf course, well, mostly trailer parks and mobile homes that are seasonal. They'll shut down in the fall and then they restart them in the spring. So yes.
Thank you.
What effect does your chemical have on antibiotics?
Bert, remember the warning at the front at the start of the meeting?
Carry on.
Thank you.
Is there anybody online, Brooke, that has a hand raised?
I'd just like to remind the participants online, if you have a question, just to use the raised hand feature and we can unmute your microphone. It doesn't look like it's on yet.
Thanks.
So we should be really looking at if any of these trailer parks is wanting to expand more than what they are, because we have a few really large ones in the township. So we should be really looking at them and figuring out something we have to do with them as far as this type of system.
That's a good point. I mean, I don't think the municipality is specifically going out and looking at them, but if they, if we do get to a point in time where there's a need for them to come to us to redevelop, we can certainly have that conversation with them.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the?
Just a comment. And this gentleman who I'm going to meet right after brought it up. You know, when we're thinking about development, say we're talking 12 or 20, even 30 homes, we're thinking more of a permanent development. but someone may want to come along and build a seasonal development. But some of those people may want to stay all year round. So that creates another issue. So there will have to be decisions made at that point in time. So how we're actually going to do this and where we're going to do it. And to Wayne, to your point, like if one of those trailer parks that have in-ground system fails, we could be on the hook for fixing it in the long run. So it's to our advantage to work with them. And we'll be working on this, all of us, over the next year or two to make sure that all that stuff is in good condition.
Yeah, when it's seasonal, and something goes wrong with the system, then it just closes. It becomes problematic, for the township or, even the utility when it's people's permanent homes, right? So there's that if something is in a transitional from seasonal to permanent, what does that look like for the servicing? And I believe one of the things the utility is looking at is if they are approached by someone who is a commercial operator, says, well, would you take over my system? It's not going to be an automatic green light and they take it over. There's going to be an inspection of the system because they're going to have to meet certain standards before the utility would be willing to take responsibility for it. But certainly anytime there's a commercial developer, either existing or proposed, we're happy to have those conversations with them.
This still being, are the developers still being waived their building permits? Is that still that was part of the original business plan? Is that still in the mix?
Don't think we can do that. It was part of one of the ideas I had, and I was told, no, if I got that right, we can't waive building permits.
That's good. They're making money. Individuals don't. Another question is, so again, counselors are to our official plan. So when you're talking about these developments, whether they're small or get the larger scale, ultimately you have to have the infrastructure for it. You've got to have the schools, you got to have the roads, you got to have medical, blah, 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 blah. I'm sure you're factoring all that in as well as the approval process for these developments or these small growth. Like I'm looking, like Sonia mentioned Verona, 80 more units. So what's the traffic going to be like in Verona? It's already bogged down. Has that been factored in, how traffic's getting in, traffic's getting out with those extra 80 buildings?
I do not know about the traffic specifically because I haven't been trying, but that would be part of the overall planning process that the township did. The one thing that I will say is the county does not have this, and I don't believe North or Central do, but both South Frontenac and Frontenac Island have a development charges bylaw. And I'm not a finance person, but essentially when new homes or businesses are built, there is an additional fee levied that is development charges are specifically identified to growth. So if there's greater use on roads, greater use in parks, and you therefore then need to upgrade roads or upgrade parks or buy a new fire truck, the money is collected from development charges at the building permit stage. Those are the monies that are used towards that infrastructure.
I know. But physically, how's that going to work? Like Verona is a log jam now with what it has existing. And I'm not a roads person, but there's nowhere to put a road through to bypass it. So by putting another 80 people and there are 80 buildings in that small village, traffic is just going to be atrocious. To me, that's just part of a planning process.
And that is something
You shouldn't be building until you know you have the infrastructure to accommodate it.
And that is something the township of South Frontenac would like. We don't do the planning for them. And just to clarify, 80 units does not equal 80 buildings because they are going to be townhouses and apartments. So it is cars, and the township was responsible for doing that work. I know that's been part of the overall master planning process. I'm not able to share the specific details. Okay, well, we are at almost 2:30 and we had kind of booked this as for about 90 minutes. So I think we will close the meeting now. Thank you everybody for coming, both personally in person and online. We can hang around if there's a few more questions afterwards if people want to. But just a reminder, if you want some more information, please send us your contact information if you want future notices, or if you're here in person, sign the sheet. And this recording will also be posted on the township's YouTube channel and linked on the Engage Frontenac page for this project. So if you want to watch it again, or you think there's somebody who couldn't come or attend today that should see it, you could share that with them as well. But thank you very much for your time today.